Do you ever wonder what the world would look like if a single sentence had been different? If one quiet moment behind closed doors had shaped history in a way nobody ever heard about? The morning of June 6th, 1944, didn't begin with explosions or heroic speeches. It began with a tremble, a faint vibration in a pair of metal radio headphones resting on a young woman's ears. The woman was Anna Müller, 21 years old, with hands that shook not from cold, but from the heavy weight of secrets. She had listened to countless broadcasts over the last 3 years, coded messages, orders barked through static, cries for supplies, soldiers begging for backup that never came. But this message, this one felt different. Anna leaned in, brow furrowing, heart drumming. Inside that cramped, shadowed radio room, history whispered before it roared. A foreign voice crackled. The landing has begun. Allied forces approaching Normandy. Repeat, the landing has begun. The words were distant, but their meaning hit like thunder. Anna didn't scream, didn't gasp, didn't even breathe. She just whispered to herself, "Is this it? Is this finally it?" Little did she know, this single whisper would soon tie her fate to 3 strangers in a story none of them would ever tell publicly, but would carry in their hearts forever. Outside the radio room stretched a long hallway, dimly lit by flickering bulbs. 3 people waited there, each carrying a burden deeper than the war itself. Jonas Weber, 26, a soft-spoken clerk whose job was to rewrite letters for injured soldiers. Letters they dictated when their hands couldn't stop shaking from shell shock. Jonas had read the hearts of hundreds of men. He carried those stories in silence like stones in his chest, each one heavier than the last. Next to him stood Frau Edel, a housekeeper who had lived more life than most people survived. Her face was a map of grief, wrinkles like faded battle lines, eyes that once sparkled but now dimmed with waiting for news about her son who had vanished 2 years earlier. And finally, Leo Stein, the quiet Jewish mechanic forced to maintain the vehicles of the very regime, destroying his people. He lived because he was useful. He stayed alive because he played the part. But inside, he planned. He waited. He listened. The 4 were strangers not by choice but by circumstance, ordinary people in the shadows of monstrous events. When Anna stepped out of the radio room, pale as moonlight, they all knew something had shifted. "What did you hear?" Jonas whispered. Anna swallowed. "Something big. Something huge." And just like that, fate nudged them together. The officer on duty stormed toward Anna, snatching the written transcript from her trembling hands. As he read, his face drained. He barked, "You 4, inside, now!" The massive wooden doors opened, swallowing them into a cold, stone-lined chamber where the air itself felt afraid. This was Hitler's private briefing room. The silence was so thick they could hear each other breathe. Anna's heartbeat hammered. Jonas clenched his fists. Frau Edel crossed herself. Leo stared straight at the table, trying not to be noticed. Then a voice rose from the far end of the room, low, cracked, unstable. "What news? Read it." Hitler didn't look powerful. He looked small, hunched, pale, hands trembling. Anna stepped forward, voice uneven as she read from the paper. "Enemy forces have initiated a large-scale landing operation on the French coast. Heavy fire reported. They are advancing rapidly." She stopped. Hitler's breathing grew sharp. His eyes narrowed. "Impossible," he muttered. "It's impossible." But it wasn't. And they all knew it. History remembers Hitler as rage incarnate, a shouting, furious tyrant. But what Anna, Jonas, Leo, and Frau Edel saw that morning wasn't rage. It was fear, pure, raw, terrifyingly human fear. He stared at the map pinned to the far wall, lines, arrows, territories, all drawn with certainty he no longer possessed. "Everything I built," he whispered, "is unraveling." Jonas watched him closely. Then, in a strange moment of clarity, Jonas realized something he would remember for the rest of his life. Even monsters fear the end of their own shadows. Throughout the war, Hitler never asked for opinions, never asked questions, never admitted doubt. But now, he looked straight at Anna and asked, "Tell me, word for word, what they said." The room froze. Anna hesitated. Her hands trembled, her throat tightened. Then she repeated the message, every syllable, a hammer pounding on the dictator's composure. Hitler stared at her, searching her face for any sign of exaggeration or deception. But there was none. Moments passed, long, cold moments. Then he said something so quiet, none of them were sure they heard him correctly. "Maybe history will forget this day." Anna, without thinking, whispered back, "History forgets nothing, especially the day darkness begins to break." Her voice was soft, but her courage was deafening. Jonas carried a small wooden box everywhere he went. Inside were letters he wrote for dying soldiers, words of love, forgiveness, and hope that he painstakingly copied into shaky handwriting, pretending they came from men who would never hold a pen again. He kept the duplicates. He didn't know why. Maybe to remind himself that even in horror, people still tried to love. As Hitler paced the room, shouting orders and demanding numbers, Jonas touched the box inside his coat pocket. "Maybe," he whispered to himself, "today is the beginning of the last letter." For the first time since the war began, he felt something like breathing again. While everyone's attention was fixed on the unfolding crisis, Leo watched the patterns. He saw which officers panicked, which phones were ringing off the hook, which maps were being frantically rearranged, and more importantly, he saw an opportunity. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't armed, but he knew machines, he knew engines, he knew exactly how to sabotage a vehicle so subtly that no one would suspect a thing. Until it mattered. And if the empire was crumbling today, he would help it fall. "Please," he thought, "just give me one opening." Frau Adel had lived through her entire world collapsing long before the war ever reached its peak. Her husband had died from illness, her home destroyed by air raids, her only son sent to the front with no promises of return. Every night she prayed, "Let me see him again. Let him walk through that door. Let me hear his voice." But the only answer was silence. Yet, on this morning, this chaotic, terrifying morning, something shifted inside her. For the first time in years, she felt a pulse of hope. Hope that this invasion meant the war was cracking. Hope that she might, finally, receive answers. Hope that her son did not die for nothing. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. The officers were scrambling. Phones rang. Boots pounded. The smell of cold sweat filled the room. Hitler demanded reinforcements, wanted maps redrawn, wanted miracles. But behind him, unnoticed, the four ordinary people exchanged glances. Small, silent, questioning glances. Anna, if not now, then when? Jonas, this chaos. We could slow it down. Leo, one spark in the right place can burn an empire. Frau Edel, if my suffering has meaning, let it be now. None of them dared speak it out loud, but they all felt it. This was the moment, and history often hinges on moments. Just as the tension grew unbearable, an officer pointed at Leo. "You, mechanic. Führer's car needs inspection immediately." Leo bowed, masking the adrenaline rushing through him. This was it. This was the opening he prayed for. If he could delay transportation, disable communication routes, just slow them down even a little, those minutes could save thousands. Anna watched Leo go, eyes wide with fear and hope, mingling like fire and smoke. Jonas squeezed her shoulder gently, a quiet reassurance in a world falling apart. Frau Edel whispered, "God go with him." And Leo stepped toward the vehicle bay, every step echoing like the heartbeat of fate. The world was shifting, history was changing, and four ordinary people were about to help push it forward, not with weapons, but with courage. Back in the briefing room, Hitler raged as officers scrambled to obey his impossible demands. Maps were rearranged, messages shouted. Panic thickened the air, but Anna, Jonas, and Frau Edel stood strangely still. Time seemed to slow. Anna's mind raced. If Leo succeeds, if we can create enough confusion, the Allies might gain precious minutes. Minutes that could mean thousands of lives. Jonas felt his wooden letterbox press against his ribs. Inside were the unspoken confessions of men who never returned home. Today, he hoped, their final words would not be repeated by another generation. Frau Edel clutched her locket. Her heart pounded with something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The storm was coming, but so was a chance for redemption. Leo entered the vehicle bay, a cavernous room echoing with metal clanks and engine roar. He approached Hitler's personal car, a sleek black machine polished to shine like obsidian. This car symbolized power, control, untouchable dominance. But today, Leo would turn it into a symbol of collapse. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the fear crawling across his skin. He loosened a fuel injector, bent a hidden valve, tucked a bolt deep inside the transmission shaft. It was subtle sabotage, the kind that wouldn't be discovered until the engine needed to roar into action. But when that moment came, it wouldn't roar, it would choke, and those seconds of failure would echo far beyond the concrete walls. When a guard approached, Leo casually wiped his hands. "Everything ready?" the guard asked. Leo nodded. "Ready." But inside, he whispered, "Let this be enough." Meanwhile, in the corridor outside the briefing room, the three remaining members of the Silent Alliance exchanged brief, loaded glances. Jonas murmured to Anna, "If Leo did his part, we must do ours." Anna nodded, understanding instantly. She could adjust the radio frequencies, a subtle change that would delay or distort critical messages. Frau Edel stepped closer, surprising them both. "I will distract them," she said calmly. "My life has been long. If today it must end, let it end doing something that matters." Anna's eyes filled with tears. "Frau Edel, no!" But the older woman smiled gently. "Young people deserve to see a world without war. Go, do your part." There were no vows, no heroic speeches, just silent determination, shared by four ordinary hearts. While officers shouted orders and ran in every direction, Frau Edel stepped into the center of the war room, calm, deliberate, and dropped her silver locket onto the polished marble floor. It clattered loudly. Everyone turned. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Oh dear," she cried, bending slowly, trembling hands unable to grasp the locket. Officers frowned. One shouted, "Old woman, move aside!" But they paused, annoyed, confused, momentarily frozen. Those few seconds of distraction were gold. Because in that tiny window, Anna was able to subtly switch frequencies on the radio transmitter. Jonas quietly rerouted certain files to the wrong desk. Short delays, small errors, barely noticeable. But in war, seconds are life, and those seconds were slipping through the enemy's fingers like sand. Hitler emerged from the war room, face pale with fury. "Prepare my car. I am leaving immediately." Officers snapped to attention. Leo stood near the vehicle, heart beating so loudly he wondered if others could hear it. Hitler climbed in. The driver turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. Again. And again, and again. A thick silence filled the garage. Hitler's face contorted in outrage. "What is this incompetence? Fix it." The driver tried again. Nothing. A wheezing, choking hiss. Leo stepped forward, pretending to inspect the engine. He shrugged. "Sir, the engine needs time to cool. It overheated." "That is impossible," Hitler roared. But it was happening. It was now undeniable. They were losing time, precious time, and Leo watched with quiet, burning triumph. As chaos swirled around him, Hitler suddenly stopped, as though a realization struck him harder than any bullet could. He whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Everything I built was built from fear." Anna froze. Jonas held his breath. Frau Edel felt a chill run through her bones. Hitler continued, not to them, not to anyone, but to whatever ghost of his own creation still haunted him. "People feared me. Enemies feared me. I feared losing control." His voice cracked, a sound none of them expected. But fear cannot hold the world together. It was not remorse, it was not apology, it was revelation. A crumbling tyrant finally glimpsing the ruins behind him. The compound was now a storm of conflicting orders and frantic movement. Phones rang unanswered. Soldiers ran in circles. Maps changed by the minute. Leo returned quietly to the hallway. He didn't need to speak. The look on his face said everything. "It worked," Anna whispered. Jonas took a shaky breath. "We have to leave, now." Leo nodded. "There's a maintenance tunnel below the garage, barely guarded. Supplies stored inside. If we're fast, we can slip out before anyone notices." Frau Edel clutched her locket to her chest. "I won't leave until you all go first." Anna took her hand gently. "No, we go together." For the first time, they felt like a family, not by blood, but by choice. They moved through the dim hallway like ghosts, blending into chaos. A lone guard glanced at them, but they carried paperwork and tools, and chaos blinds people more than darkness ever could. Leo opened the metal hatch leading into the tunnel. Cold, damp air breathed out, carrying the scent of earth and oil. "This way," he whispered. One by one, they descended the ladder. Anna first, then Jonas, then Frau Edel, then Leo. The tunnel was narrow and smelled of rust, but it was freedom. The world above shook with fear, but here, in the shadows, hope grew legs. They walked toward a single pinprick of sunlight far ahead, the exit, and every step felt like a lifetime shed. Weeks passed. The war collapsed. Nations breathed again. Children laughed again. The world, broken but healing, began to rise from the ashes. Anna, Jonas, Leo, and Frau Edel eventually found one another in a refugee camp, no longer bound by fear, but by the story they shared. Anna became a teacher, shaping young minds with kindness she had fought to preserve. Jonas opened a tiny shop where he framed and displayed the letters he had written, a tribute to lives cut short. Frau Edel learned that her son died bravely, saving others, and she carried that truth like a final gift. Leo bought a small garage where he repaired cars for free for families who had lost loved ones in the war, believing that kindness was the strongest rebellion. Every year on June 6th, they met at sunrise, not to mourn, but to remember the moment they chose courage over silence. One summer morning, decades after the war, a young reporter interviewed Leo. "Sir," the reporter asked softly, "you were there that day. Do you remember what Hitler really said? His exact words?" Leo took a deep breath. He looked at Anna, Jonas, and Frau Edel beside him, his chosen family, and with a calm, steady voice he answered, "Yes, I remember." The reporter leaned closer. "So, what did he say?" Leo's reply was gentle, powerful, unforgettable. He said fear built his world, but courage destroyed it. He placed a hand over his heart. And that day, courage didn't come from armies. It came from ordinary people who decided they'd been afraid long enough. The reporter whispered, "And what did that day mean to you?" Leo smiled. "It was the day we learned that even the smallest act of bravery can change the course of history." The four of them stood together as the sun rose, a reminder that darkness, no matter how vast, cannot survive the moment ordinary hearts choose light.